Hello, everyone. This is the second part of the English One podcast with Nelson Jones. Welcome, my friend.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm so happy and so glad that we can reschedule from yesterday for to today. So I hope that is not messing too much in your plan for today. But we are finished the first episode, which if some case you are not seeing it, you're supposed to check it out. It's gonna be somewhere probably out there. I trying to add it on the YouTube if I can, but. Last time we talked a little bit about the off-season setups for a guy who wanted to transition into from the like a lightweight into a heavy or super heavyweight like uh, class. Yes, that's the word I'm lost. Class. So we assume that we are finished the off season and we transition into the prep mode. We was talking about that. So let's talk about the competition prep setups. So, how much time you like to have with your clients for the whole prep? Because some guys like to do it a shorter way, like 8 to 12 weeks. Some coaches like to do 16, 20, some even 25 or even more weeks. How about you?
Um, Ideally, anywhere from 16 to 20 weeks. If I have 20 weeks and I have a pretty good, like in shape client, we don't need all 20 to get shredded, but at least then you could really figure out how to bring them in best, right? And it's better to have more time than less time. If you have less time, you can make no mistakes. And having that buffer really helps like everything come in smooth. Um, So I always like having a little bit extra time.
Okay, even if guys who you're working for a long, long time, for example, you know, a guy could get in shape in 8 to 12 weeks, you still will do a little bit longer time, for example, 14 to 16 weeks, just to have some, like you say,
So
buffer.
that's a good question. In those cases, especially when it doesn't take them a really long time, what I end up start doing is like we call it prep. And be like, okay, we're in prep now. And we don't necessarily change things, but it kind of gets your mindset a little different. Um, and we don't push really hard right out. But yeah, in those cases, no, I don't use as much time. I might bring them in, let's say it takes them 10 to 12 weeks. I might use 14 for them and really pushing them. But I really like having people ready early and then getting the cardio out and getting your food up. Um, I want to have as much time as possible at the end to have your body rested so that when you're going in, there's no rushing. It's not like you were just doing whatever it was, 60 minutes, 90 minutes of cardio, and then you're doing your show, you know?
So you like to cut the calories slowly or do something like a bigger cut for the beginning of the prep and then slowly even increase it if it's possible for some guys. And let's says that we are still talking about the a guy who you are working for the first time, but he's in a pretty good shape because you are working with him for a whole year, so you are not allowed him to get fat.
Right. No need for a mini cut. He just stayed in good shape.
Yes.
Um, Ideally, probably first time I'm working with this guy, I'm probably going to go a little hard out of the gate. I'm going to push him, let's say that first 4 weeks of his prep to really get the fat loss going. If it goes really well and it speeds up, then you get to even pull back. But we'll go ahead and we'll take that first part of prep to really get it moving. This could mean pulling calories. This could mean going from 2 to 3 days of cardio to five and just being like, okay, maybe you're doing 20 minutes of cardio and we're doing 5 days of 30 minutes. So it's like, it's just more activity. Or it could mean like, okay, we also added plan in, something like that to just start the process. Won't necessarily look severe, but it's definitely more than they were doing. And I want to get fat loss off, really propelled. So yeah, in that case, I would like to go a little harder out the gate and then see how you're responding.
Yeah, it makes
As long
sense.
as every, yeah, as long as everything's going well, then you don't have to go that severe.
Yeah, it makes sense because not a lot of guys realize that it's some sort of a snowball effect. So, for example, if you are on a very huge caloric surplus for a long, long time, it's take a while to get into the caloric deficit. Even if you are cut, for example, for example, 100 or 1500 calories at the gate, it's still gonna take a while to get into that deficit really. So yeah, it's really yeah, I would say a safe approach. It's like a wise approach.
And obviously, it's like different coaches use different approaches with different people. But what I saw from Chad Nichols with me and several other people he had, we might have had 6,500 calories. And when prep started, it dropped like by 3,000. He would push. And, there was just, I mean, so there's a big range here, like how hard you can go. But it literally went from, let's say it was 100 grams of carbs every meal minimum to uh, nothing over 50 carbs per meal.
So,
Hard out the gate.
so like
I
a
don't like pushing hard, but
50%.
yeah. I don't like pushing it that hard, but to really, I mean, when you talk about people who feed people the most, he has to be feeding people more than most people. I when I look at um, plans from different people or just think of different approaches, Chad's always like he's the heavy feeder, right? And it takes a minute to get into the deficit. So I would say uh, for him, it's like he just likes to get into it. It
I
does
think
take a bit.
I have a question because you said he is a heavy eater, but you mean in the off season? Because I know he is he's like his like a rotation. You can call it like that. For
Yeah.
example, he gives you almost no food during the week, and then you have something like a non-calorie restrict day on the weekends.
Oh, you in off season?
No, on the
Um,
contest prep.
Conscious prep, yeah. So what I'm saying is like in off season, the food is insanely high. In prep, it's just insanely low. Um, it just goes from black to white. It is the exact opposite. But the protein's always high. So that the point there is, oh, you retain muscle due to protein and just how hard you're training. Um, I don't like doing it like that. And just even personally, that was very hard.
Yeah.
Just like keeping up training and everything. But this is just going to what you're saying as far as it taking a minute to get into the deficit. Some people can cut right into it and force you're in the deficit now. Um, but yeah, when you've built up, especially when you're looking at a male bodybuilder who's really built up calories, it does take a minute to get into the deficit. Um, because if you cut, I know like a lot of people preach, oh, we'll pull 100 calories or 250 calories, and that's how you start. If you're doing that and you've built your food up 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 calories, you're not going to notice 100-calorie deficit, period. You're not, you know? And nothing might happen. Your weight might stay the exact same and never change.
Or sometimes I've noticed even increased because your food like how to say it, you better absorb the foods because it's less like an impact on the digestion system, but you still on the caloric surplus, so your body have like a more possibilities to use those foods to even grow. This like a very common thing in the off season for the guys. Sometimes I lower their foods and they start to grow then.
100%.
Yeah,
It's usually because you've overshot it a little bit with how much food, right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
so by pulling just a little bit off, it's like, oh, now you digest your food better. Now that the food is digesting better and it's assimilating better, it's like, oh, now you're just starting to grow a little better because you're not packing so much down. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So you mentioned training. Do you believe that in a contest prep setup, the training should differs by any mean, especially from the start going, or it should be exact the same as the in the off season?
When we're starting, I want it the exact same. I I don't even want the mindset to change at all during prep. Really, it's like what I want is you're in the gym to put on muscle, right? And that does not change the whole time. I still want you trying to put on muscle. I still want you trying to achieve PRs. Um, the goal there is the same. The only thing that changes ever in my for my athletes is when you get down toward the end, we're just trying to be a little safer. It's not, we're always trying to build muscle, but at the end, it's like, okay, you're whatever you are, maybe you're 5% body fat, six, you're, you don't have like a ton of like fluid around your joints. You're very lean. It's just dangerous to be pushing really, really hard. So we back off a little at the end. But, when you're 8 weeks out and you're like, oh, I'm dying. It's like, well, you're still 8 weeks out. You can push.
Yeah, but what do you mean by we are not pushing it so much? You mean, for example,
Okay.
changing of the exercise? Because, for example, we both know it's going to be a safer, for example, to bench press or even a deadlift when you have some sort of cushioning, like you said, yes, so a little bit more fluid and stuff like that. When you're drier, let's say, because I don't like this word, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I know what
You
you
have
mean.
less body fat, so you have like a more range of motions with all of your lifts, and definitely you feel a little bit weaker because of less potentiation of your body mass even to push heavier weights. So uh, exercises like a bench press, like a deadlift, starts to tend to be a little bit more riskier. So you like
Yeah.
to switch them then, for example, from free weight movement to a machine.
Um, so that's a good question. And it's definitely that's a valid option. With something like a deadlift, I probably wouldn't switch it. If someone is bench pressing, then I probably would switch it to like a Smith. Personally, I like the Smith anyway, as far for
Yeah.
pressing.
Bench press is
It's
not for a bodybuilders.
right. So I feel like that's the safer option. And honestly, I feel like you can push harder. You don't need someone right there making sure you're okay. There's also just been so many torn pecs. Uh, it's just a dangerous thing. What I mean more of is when you're at the end, I don't want to see someone going for dumb things like, oh, I think I can get that weight. I've gotten it for 3 reps before. Let me try today. No, today's not the day to try. It's like 6 months ago was when to try. Now is to get something you know you can get and push that as far as you can. If you got 9 reps last time, all right, get 9, try to get 10. Today is not the day to try something you've never tried before.
So how close to the show you like to switch a little bit the training for your athletes in terms of less intense training, let's say. So, for example, they are pushing for a 6 to 8 reps, and you like, for example, to switch it up for a 12 to 20 or something like that. Just a little bit safely.
Yeah. Well, if I'm looking at training across the board, I do have a lot of higher rep ranges in my training, like especially with leg training, it's higher. I'm really pushing reps there. I usually don't change the actual training until probably the week of the contest. And even then, what I'm doing is like, okay, maybe Monday, Tuesday, it's like, I want you to reduce total volume by 20%. So if you're doing 10 sets, I want you to do eight. It's like I want you to go in and we're just going to pull back a little bit. And then maybe it's like, okay, usually people are only training until Thursday. But it's like the last 2 days, I want you to go in and don't even train how we've been training. Go get a pump. I want you to, because we're at this point, you don't need anything in else, and we don't want to create more inflammation. I just want you to go in and get a pump. So depending on the division, I'll write a new split for that week. So let's say it was, bodybuilding. The last thing I want is, we're not hitting legs probably, because
Yeah.
we don't want that super inflamed. Um, let's say on Thursday, we're probably doing like pecs and shoulders and maybe some arms. And probably the day before we hit some back. If it were something like, a wellness, it's like clearly you're hitting glutes or something going in, and you're not hammering legs. Um, but that's kind of what I'm keeping in mind until then. I usually am not upping rep ranges as we're going in, just because we have a variety of rep ranges, and I don't keep a ton of people around 6. Usually, I'm more in 8 to 12 in the low end.
Okay. I don't have that question write it down, but I think I should. Do you like your guys to log booking their lifts, or you are more like okay, okay,
Absolutely. Um, I think there are some things that need to be logged. Um, and I'm not a strict, like, you have to logbook everything guy, although I think it's helpful. That is a habit of the best bodybuilders. I'll say that. So if you're like, you have your, side lateral raises logbooked, you're probably covering everything else, right? You're covering all the bases. You're probably not the person who has no clue how much sodium he's eating, because you're the guy who does that. Um, Now, I don't think that, because I'm going to use that for an example. I don't think that side laterals are something that you're going to really improve on much across a prep.
yeah,
I mean, it's not a lift that you get way stronger at quickly, like a leg press, where you can add, like a plate at a time, or 5 reps at a time. But so I would say that even that is on the smaller end of the importance scale. What I want to make sure every athlete is doing is their major important lifts need to be documented, and you need to know what they are. Um, like your Smith press, you need to know what that is. You need to know what your incline Smith press is. You should know what your rack pull or your deadlift is every week. You should like write down what any kind of like a really heavy leg movement. You should know all that. That way we can track those. The minor things, let's say like um, dumbbell bicep curls. That's probably not the most important thing to know, but if you're just track it, just track everything. You might as well.
yeah. But
But
what? Mhm.
I would say, yeah, at the minimum, I want those important lifts, because I want to know how we improve from week to week. And you need to know going into the session, okay, I got 9 reps last week. It was really hard. I'm going to shoot for 9. And like in my head, um, you're already thinking about the session. It's putting you in the state to improve.
Yeah, but I am exactly the same. I believe that if someone is tracking your fats, protein, water intake, and stuff like that, you should definitely not allow for the training to be like whatever. Yeah, because
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
is as this is it even sounds silly that someone is tracking the 1.2 fats of grams of fats in the bread, but did, don't even remember how much he's pulling from the ground 2 weeks ago or something like that. But there are guys, especially on prep, because we are talking about the prep today,
Mhm.
whose mind is really gonna fuck with them.
Yeah.
And what about those guys? Because, for example, I'm in a prep for a quite of bit right now, and
Yeah.
I'm still in sort of prep, don't have a show yet, but I am still pushing my body like I
Mhm.
am on a prep. So I'm on a mission. And I've noticed that I'm stopped watching my logbook at all. I am not even tracking my lifts in my mind right now. I am not even following the certain plan. For example, I might go to do a chest tomorrow and do whatever I really feel like, because this is something that's allowed me right now to give as much as I can for now with my session. Because if I was still tracking my lifts, and I know that I'm weaker as
Right.
compared to 6 weeks, 8 weeks ago, I probably even 30% or something like that. And that's very hard on my mind. So what about those guys?
Okay, that's a great question. Um, because for sure, if you are that person, right, you are the person who tracks everything. You're not the go with the flow person. You're very like orderly and you're already in contest shape. Looking at those doesn't really help you because you're not going to be able to hit the numbers because you are just weaker. And the only thing that looking at it does is set you up for like frustration and anxiousness and like mental fatigue. And honestly, like people get depressed. So you're 100% right. I think it's hard to say at what point we cut the logbook out. But once you're in pretty dang good shape, it's not super applicable. Um, One, because we're not looking to improve, we're looking to retain as much muscle as possible. Bodybuilding is not a very at the bodybuilding at the high levels here we're talking about is not a go with the flow type of sport. We're so orderly. We have a plan all the time. Once we get into this state where you're in pretty dang good shape, and you've been in contest shape for a bit, you know, when we're there, yeah, we can't really look at the logbook. I think it's probably important to be like, okay, what did I do last week in terms of did I use shoulder press? Did that hurt? Was it was it something that I liked? I went to this new gym. I tried this. Those kind of things probably good to make note of. But in terms of numbers and like, okay, am I trying to beat this? What am I? 100%. At some point, we do ditch that. It's different with everyone, but we're probably, if I have to put a timeline on it, we're probably looking at that 4 week mark is where it starts to not be applicable. You're just in such good shape, especially when you've done multiple contests in a row. When you're on your second, third contest, you've been in shape and continuing to obsess over whether or not you got 315, 325, or 335, it just doesn't matter.
Okay, so technical question, like coach to coach, how do you really talk that with your guys? How do you, because there are guys who are just not willing to tell you that, coach, I am not gonna log my lifts right now because I that's mentally tasking on me. But they are trying, or they gonna try to still log booking them. Do you ask them question if that's really something you feel is helpful for you right now, or it's maybe a counterproductive for you right now? Do you have those kind of phone calls with your clients, or how do you manage them?
Yeah, it always depends on the client, right? One thing I've learned about coaching is everybody needs a different coach in terms of person A is going to need something different from me than person B is. So I might have a guy who um, he doesn't need for me to talk about that. He's not worried about it. He just, you told me to do something. Yes, sir, I'm going to do it. That's just his thing. Now, that guy probably needs me to check on him more than he thinks because he's just like, oh, I can do it all. Um, Someone else might really want to talk it through, might be pretty vulnerable with how he's feeling, and just like, it's like I don't feel good. It's like this is really messing with my head. It's like, and that person's gonna have to like probably I'll have to talk things through with that person. It's like, hey, so here's what I'm thinking. It's like I don't think you need to look at your logbook. It's like we probably need to do this, and we kind of need to come up with a game plan every week. Just like a overall like, hey, here's what we're doing. Um, but yeah, it's different for everybody. I've definitely had those conversations where it's like, listen, you're in great shape. Don't worry about the weight as much this week. When you tell those people who are worried about it, don't worry about it as much this week, they're never the people who are just not going to try. They're always going to push themselves hard. I think some coaches maybe might worry, like, oh, if I tell them not to worry about it, then they'll just play around. The people who are really worried about it will never do that. It's kind of like the people who keep asking you, "Hey, can I have 1.25 liters of water, or do you want me to have 1.5 liters of water?" Those people aren't like cheating on things. They're trying to get every single thing right, right? So um, we have those guys, and then with the other people, the people who don't maybe mention things as much, or they just do whatever. Those are who you need to probably come out of your shell and say, "Hey, listen, it's like as we're approaching this end, uh, I know things are going to be getting a little weaker starting soon because I've looked at you. Your glutes are in. You sent me videos. Every time you like set up for your back double, I'm hearing a bunch of cracking because like when you're lean, it's like you hear all
Yeah,
those sounds. It's like we're going to start, I mean, push, and we don't need to worry about that stuff as much anymore. But yeah, you have to be something different to everybody.
yeah.
Everybody needs someone different.
Definitely, definitely. So, how about the? We're gonna talk about the PEDs right now because this is the
Yeah.
for most people the most important thing. But how about the PEDs change in the contest prep? You like to start them like from the beginnings, like transition into the diet compounds, let's say it like that. Some people like to think that some compounds are for dieting, are for bulking and stuff like that. We both know that is not a true, but it is to some point.
I mean, the reason that we use like cutting compounds during prep is like because they work well in prep. So
Yeah,
it's like, yeah, sure. Like Winstrol doesn't have magic fat burning powers, but you use it in the end because you look better, right? So the first part of prep is still the basic PEDs. It would be whatever we were running. So I like running things in phases. Let's say I'm doing 8 to 12 week blocks of PEDs in off season. Um, we're either still on one of those blocks or starting a new one, probably going into that 10 or 8 week mark, 8 week out mark, right? Um, and so whatever that is, whether it's, excuse me, test and primo, or maybe it's like a test and EQ and NPP or something. Once we get into that 10 to 8 week mark out, then that's when I'd be implementing more like the bodybuilding, like prep drugs. Um, And so, I mean, yeah, we can talk about whatever you want with that. But let's say I was doing that, it would be probably every guy would be on test. There might be EQ, there might be primo. Probably that's when trend's coming in. I think because that's usually what everyone wants to know. When do I put in trend? And it's like usually it's around that mark. And then with orals, I always like to wait um, toward the end. But if I'm putting one in, I like putting in Proviron. That can come in a little earlier. Um, and it's not something with a bunch of negative health consequences if you leave it in longer, right? You can't leave halo testing in for eight
yeah,
weeks, but you can put in Proviron earlier.
yeah, definitely. So, how about the GH? Do you believe that more GH supposed to be used in a contest prep setup or in a off-season setup?
So if we're talking about, because the last time we had like our ideal setup, right? If we have our ideal setup, then I'm just using the same amount of GH because we had a lot. If it comes down to money, which is usually what growth hormone comes down to, um, then like let's say we could only afford three for off season, just like all the guy had. Now I'm like, okay, listen, so we're saving up for prep because prep's like, you're going to go get a pro card, you're going to go do whatever. Um, I want to run more than three. Possible. I'd like to run 4 to 6. Um, and this is when it's like you talk about timing or whatever. You're going to get more bang for your buck with lipolysis, fat loss, if you're spreading them out, right? So with this is when you would take more advantage of that. If in off season you're like, okay, well, I just had one dose. It's like, okay, we're going to break it up now. So if I had 6, then I'd probably put it in 3 places, because you can spread it out a bit. So maybe I would do before bed in the morning, we work out, or before bed, and then no, that's great. I would do that.
Yeah,
Sounds awesome.
in the middle
Yeah,
of the
before
day,
bed.
and yeah,
Yeah, and then that way, I mean, it's a totally fair thing to just implement it evenly spaced through the day. That's very viable. And but I like the before bed option so much at this point. I always want to do one before bed.
yeah, definitely. So, what about the fat burners? Because you've mentioned that for some guys, if you're started from the get-go, you like to start the clan even on a day one. But for those who are on a like a more standard fashion preps, when do you like to incorporate fat burners, and what will be your pick of choice?
So I cleanse great fat burner. I think I don't have a time when I start it, but usually I put it in when someone's doing enough cardio to make it worthwhile, you know? So it's like if you're doing 5, 6 days of cardio, you might as well have some cleanse and put it in there and make your cardio more effective. That's what we're looking for here. It's like we want to make what we're doing more effective. And you're kind of looking at it that way with, growth hormone. So it's like, okay, if we're having these periods where we're not eating tons of carbs, it's like that's where you put in the growth hormone and you can kind of double up and get more efficacy out of each move. And I think that's how you take a prep that could last this long and you pull it in this long because you're just optimizing different points, right? Um, so with Clen, some people I like starting it early, and then some people I like starting it, let's say it's 12 weeks. But no matter what, we're only using things as long as we need them. And the good thing about Clen is it can be something that's put in and pulled out. So uh, if it stops being as effective after the 2 week, 3 week period, okay, pull it out. And you don't necessarily have to put it back in until later. Uh, in terms of other fat burners, T3 is really the one that comes to mind, but I don't like using that until someone's T3 is downregulated. So if your thyroid is working well, I don't like putting that in yet because there's going to be a point when it starts to go. I think that's the point when you put the T3 in so that you never like your progress never slows.
Yeah, great that you say that because I don't like to put the T3 into the same category as a fat burners because I believe that it is absolutely not a fat burner because it's not selective and it works
Right,
as well on your muscles as on your fat tissues. So
right,
if you are not needed, you should not supposed to use it. And if you need it, the lab works should tell you when you should incorporate and what amount you should incorporate because you can lab test this easily. So this is not supposed to be something that it's even because I wanted to mention that because some people steal things and use it like a fat burner. So, for example, they put it 50 micrograms, 75
right.
micrograms. I see the protocols like that, and I can even believe that someone could stand that of a dose. For me, like a 20 to maximum 30 micrograms for those who
Yep.
are using a lot of GH, they just simply need it. It's more than enough. But what about the stuffs like Joachimbein, for example, or Frag GH?
Um, I like Yohimbine. I used to use it more than I do. I think it's one of those things where bodybuilders like anything where they can get an extra percent.
Yeah.
You know, if you can optimize it by just 1%, then it's worth it because it's like you work so damn hard all year. Anything that gives me this much edge, they want. And it's kind of one of those things. I don't think it's amazing, but I used it on and off. I almost the product I really liked was Vasoburn by MPA Subs,
Yeah.
which is topical yohimbine, and it also has capsaicin, and you just rub it on. Now, I would have people use that and also oral yohimbine. Um, that's not something that I necessarily think, oh, it's 14 weeks out, we have to start it.
Mhm.
But I'd plug it in when fat loss either stalls or um, once we get closer, maybe there's more of a time crunch or the cardio's high enough to really make use of it.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that's probably 100% of the coaches give me the same answer, but I still gonna ask you, what about the diet changes? What's get rid of first? Fats, carbs, protein. If the proteins change throughout the whole contest prep, how about the carbs? Do you like to keep them as high as is possible? And then what about the fats as well?
Might be a pretty similar answer to the other answers
Yeah.
then. Yeah, protein's not changing. If I'm not saying protein's never changed, it has before, but
Right.
it it's very unusual for it to change. Um, I think in any case of which protein's changed, maybe it's gone up. You know, if maybe it was a bikini girl, it had to go down. But like in most guys, like we're talking, probably has gone up if it's changed at all. If I had to, like obviously it's so individual, but I would say if I had to guess, if we had a decent amount of dietary fat, I'm usually hacking at that first, because I love keeping carbs as high as they can be. Guys just train so well on carbs in general. Um, it's I want to pull carbs down last if I can, and I want to leave the carbs around training as like the last possible thing I touch. So all my people have an intra. That intro is staying there, like until the very end. Like you have that probably during peak week. And you know what? It's funny because in off season, a lot of people who are just starting with me or they've never used an intro workout before, uh, they are like, just dumb. Why do I have carbs in training? I would rather have the rice, that kind of
Yeah.
thing. When you're 6 weeks out, and that's helping you train. I wouldn't get rid of this for anything. This is, it's like whatever this is, even if it's 20 grams of carbs, like this makes me feel so good in the gym. I would never get rid of this, whether that's, a Gatorade or whatever it is. Um, but yeah, I usually cut the carbs away from training. And, we talked about the different days in the last episode. I'm usually pulling from the off day first.
Yeah.
Just so I can leave the performance on my training day as high as possible. But also, we're if we have one day where we're not doing much and we're pulling from that day, you're probably going to have more fat oxidation just throughout the day because it's overall lower calorie, overall lower fat, right? So it's almost like you're having days to really recover and days where you're burning more fat.
Yeah, definitely. And what about the cardio and the food relationships? Because some coaches like to bump it up the cardio and leave the food as high as is possible, and some coaches like to do it otherwise. How about you?
Good question. It's there was an interview with Evan Centopani. I remember watching a long time ago. This might have even been like 2012 or something. But I remember him talking about like, oh, I really like leaving up my food as high as possible and bumping cardio as high as possible. Because if I can do as much work, and I think it's so different for everybody in terms of like what you can handle. Because someone like that, he processed the food and partitioned it to muscle really well, and then he just did the cardio and he got shredded. You know,
Yeah.
now we're not all like that. I'm certainly not. Um, I do want to leave food as high as possible, but I don't want someone to have to do a ton of cardio where they're exhausted, and it almost makes it worthless. So it's kind of individual. When you have someone with great genetics, if they're doing 40 minutes of cardio pretty early and just churning through, abs are coming in, like you're seeing lines in their glutes start moving, and their food's pretty high. I mean, you found a pretty good system. For most people, I don't think it works like that. For most people, I think in general, you're probably pulling both down at a reasonable. I mean, it's coming up, right, and they're matching. Um, I think it's really only in those special cases where you can kind of leave one high and then push the other high.
Okay. And what about the types of cardio? Do you like to do it steady state or more like a hit? It
It's changed
depends.
over the it's changed over, it's changed over the years too. Um, but I think here's what's changed. My athletes have trained a lot harder, and the people I've attracted are harder training people. Early on, I would use more hit, and I didn't have nearly as much issue with recovery. Those people weren't training as hard. I think now it's very hard to get away with true hit. And when we're talking about true hit cardio, um, truthfully, how much can you do it? 3 times a week? I
Yeah.
mean, it's like, especially if you're training hard, because if you're training 4 to 5 days a week and you're doing that, I mean, that's 8 sessions across your week, pretty much, because true hit cardio is like a leg session if you're hammering it. So I might have some intervals in, but it's not hit. For the most part, it's that moderate, steady state, 120 to 130, 40 beats per minute in a heart rate. That's what we're looking for most cardio. Um, I think most things will work, right? I think treadmill works, step mill works.
Yeah.
What you're looking for is for each person, you have to watch their fatigue. So if someone is doing stairs and they look phenomenal and there's no negatives, well, let them do stairs because they're burning more calories. But for a lot of people, they are training so hard and they go on the stairs for whatever 40 minutes and their legs are exhausted and they just start looking um, worn and inflamed. Okay, well, that guy can't do it. He might have to do elliptical or go on walks, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think as long as you're monitoring your athlete's fatigue and how flat he's getting, you can kind of use anything. It's just going to have to be like, what does that person need?
Okay. So another question that's probably everyone's just waiting for. What about the cheat meals? Do you prefer to use a cheat meal when it's time, for example, to refuel your athlete, or more like a refeed fashion? So you're controlling exactly what and how much they eat.
Most of the time, it's a refeed. Most of the time, well, I'll say this: no matter what, I'm telling them what to eat. So even if it's a cheat meal, you don't go pick the cheat meal, you know. So it's not like, oh, cheat meal, I'll just go have it. It's always me picking, but it's usually a refeed. Um, Here are the instances I'd use a cheat meal. So we'll start there. I would use a cheat meal if that person feels like really worn down mentally. They're very fatigued and like they need it. They usually don't tell me they need it, but you can tell when an athlete's like pretty beat up. There's the another instance is time. If I have a refeed, that's an all day situation. It might be multiple days where I'm giving someone a refeed. If I do not have the time, I can get more calories in you in 4 hours and you're done. You have a cheat meal or you have two quick things and it's over. We go right back to work. That's the instances I use a cheat meal.
Yeah, I was
And
smiling because I know
yeah,
that as soon as I'm gonna release this podcast, you're gonna have at least a couple of messages that, Coach, I'm so worn up.
yeah. It's funny because like honestly, I'm pretty like I have some great people. I do not have many complainers. I don't know
Yeah.
what but I don't have many people who complain. And my job as a coach has been mostly to pull people back from themselves. I have a lot of yeah.
Yeah, in terms of what you just said, do you believe that cheat meals is something that every athlete should have on their plan? For example, for a mental state like release. And I am not talking about like I need to eat something different or I just need to eat something more than usual just because I need to refuel my body or something like that, but more like a mental aspect, but not even on a social level, but more on the relationships with the food level. Because, for example, for me, I think that I don't need to do any cheat meals, or I think that it's even helping me to not having any cheat. But if I'm recalling it in a time and I'm thinking right now, I think that I need to incorporate some sort of cheat meals during the off season, and that's gonna be something that I'm gonna talk with my coach probably because it is very hard for me to even have a desire to have a cheat, but it's just because I know that I would really love to eat something, but I know that I don't need it.
Mhm.
I can eat additional bowl of cream of rice that I like, and I
Yeah,
don't need to eat a burger. But this is something, for example, that for that reason, me and my wife wasn't been on a date for I don't know how long right now. And she's the same as me. She's also an athlete, but she's actually a pro, as you can see.
yeah,
So yeah, and she has the same attitude. Like we would love to go on a date, but we feel like we're gonna go somewhere, and I don't know if I wanted to order that because I know that's just a shitty calories, or this
yeah,
is a meal that I don't really need to eat. We can as
yeah,
well stay home. Maybe we're gonna cook something and then we just think about that and we just eat what we have on the plan. And then the
mhm,
times is going and you started to build something in your brain that like a system that you think that you don't need it,
mhm.
but you actually you know what I'm
Sure.
going to, yeah?
So you're talking about more of like the mental health of the athlete in general
Yes.
and how you view food. Yeah. So in the off seasons, like my athletes have a cheat meal in their plan. And it's for a couple of reasons. It's maintaining relationships, right? And I think that's probably the who you're eating with is more important than the food you're eating. So whether that's um, your wife and you like, especially like with most people, their wives are not bodybuilding, and
Yeah.
they deal with you lugging your Tupperware around and like the car smelling of fish and all this all the time. It's like they need that with you because they put up with your dumb stuff. And you know what? And you need that with her. You need your time with her where you're not thinking about something. I think it's probably important in general to have some food that you're not going to weigh, that you're not going to worry about or stress about. Um, and it's funny that you mentioned kind of like your own perspective of food, because I'm sure if you talk to most athletes who have like worked their way up and just done this for a period, our view of food is so different from a normal person.
Yeah.
Um, even now, the when I eat anything, it's like I'm thinking about how many grams of protein, what am I doing? I don't need that. I had the fat last meal. I've had the carbs. Okay, I want to, it's like I'm already like I'm processing everything. And obviously for me, I cook my own food. I don't go out and do things. But in general, what happens is on the weekend, I have two daughters. It's like I want to eat one meal with them. But really, it's like it's not because like, yeah, I don't care. I don't want anything. And I could usually cook something better than whatever I'm going to eat. I want to have some time with them, and especially because they're young, where they see me eating like a normal person and I can just enjoy my time. Um, and honestly, normally I don't want the meal. And afterwards, I'm usually glad I had it. You know, there's only been a couple times where you're like, it's like I would have rather had the steak I cooked,
Yeah.
but there's always options where you can go grab sushi or something with your wife or whatever, even if it's just something like you haven't had in a really long time. Off season's the time for that. You know, is it going to make you a better bodybuilder? No,
Yeah, and
but
that's the problem. That's the problem.
right, that's where we get in our head. It's like
Because in my head, I'm thinking this is not gonna help me with my progress. Because even on the off season, my coach even says to me, one meal in a week, or even two meals in a week on the off days, the last meal you can eat whatever you want. But I've never done this. Never.
I think especially when you've worked so hard for so long, it's so easy to be like, well, if I skip this, I'll only get better.
Yeah.
But is it when it's one meal? I don't know. I think sometimes we don't know what we're missing as far as mental state. And you can't know what you're missing, right?
Yeah.
So it's definitely worth the try. All my athletes have it, but the reason they have it is just because I think it's good for them to spend time with their people. It helps them uh, not not think about food as much. And generally, if you're eating on plan all the time, you're really not thinking about food very much. Um, but it's nice to have that time just to relax and not weigh something and spend it with your partner. Um, but no, I totally get what you're saying. I think overall for uh, mental health and how you view food, it's probably a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. I think so. Okay, so let's get straight into a peak week because the peak week is the that magical time that everyone who is 25% of body fat, which is probably water, it's
Yeah,
gonna
probably water.
magically turn into a Mentor, Mike Mentor.
Yeah,
So yeah, so
yeah.
so the first question, because this is like questions that most of the competitors struggle with. Do you cut the GH before competition? And if the answer is yes, how long before?
Good question. So there's some factors I look at because I could say like it's individual and it is, but I'll try to explain like the process here, right? That'll help
It
more people.
depends. Yeah.
Yeah, it just that's a cop out answer. Um, if you're looking at someone who holds more water, you want to get rid of the things that hold water early. If you're looking at someone who looks very dry when they walk around, you get to hang on to that growth hormone for longer or not pull it out. Example, if you look like John Meadows walking around, just like sandpaper scraping over a rock, you don't need to get rid of the growth hormone. Actually, that's probably holding better fullness. With those people, you know, the people who are worried about like, well, creatine's holding a little water. Well, then you probably need to get rid of it,
Yeah.
because you're not clean enough. But if you are that John Meadows type of guy, you're not getting any drier by pulling your growth hormone. You're not. Leave it in. Um, and then whatever you do with water at the end, you're gonna be fine. I mean, honestly, if you look like that, don't do anything. Just go on stage.
Yeah.
Um, with others, I think you should at least start lowering it coming into your show. So maybe that's 2 weeks out, maybe it's 10 days out, maybe it's 7 days out. It depends where you start. The higher growth hormone you start, the farther out. Let's say, use it. Last time we were using the example of 10, I use, I believe, the last episode. So if you started at 10, maybe at 2 weeks out, I would bump it. I would pull it down to 8 or 6. And then a couple days later, I would pull it down a couple IUs. Once we're in that 5 day range, it's not there. Um, if we're really looking for like optimizing
Yeah.
that, there's different strategies to fullness on show day, but usually they don't include keeping it in. It could be reintroducing the growth hormone, but oftentimes it should be out with like around 5 days ish out.
Okay. So when it comes to the compounds that holding water, do you cut the test or lower it as much as possible before the show? And if so, how long?
Okay. So we're still looking at the same factors. Or is that guy someone who holds water? But we're also kind of looking at different factors. How's his fullness? If his fullness isn't great, pulling the test is probably going to not, he won't be as full. Is this person super estrogenic? If you're someone who aromatizes, and that's also a reason, I mean, usually they go together, right? You're holding water, estrogenic. That might be someone you have to pull the test out. I don't like pulling the test out. For me, it's more of those last resorts. I've done it. And if I'm doing it, I'm probably doing it for the last week or 2 weeks. I really don't like doing it. But if you're looking at somebody and just like, listen, you have to be, this is the end result right here. So to get there, you're just watery, and I know you're lean. You're going to have to start pulling triggers. One of those will have to be, yeah, the testosterone's going to have to be pulled. If you're using a propionate, you can do it closer. Obviously, if you have an enanthate or cypionate, something like that, it's going to have to be a little further out.
Okay. So what about injectable compounds all around? Because there's coaches who are just preventally pull them out, for example, 1 week out, just because we both know that it's going to be potentiation for holding water, even from the histamine release, like a case or something like that. So how about your approach? Because I have a coaches that leave them till the night of the show, and the coaches who are pulling it out even at 10 days out.
So on guys who have held a lot of water, I usually pull them further. Let's say a week. I mean, some 10 days, honestly. With the guys who don't hold water and also haven't had a history of any bumps or anything like that. Like we've watched all contests, yeah. Nothing has irritated their skin, nothing has left bruises, nothing has, because you can always tell, right? When it's like all the sites are looking weird or discolored, or there's been any issue. A lot of times, as you get really lean, you start seeing a lot more issues, right? A lot more accidents happen. Maybe there's like Skip Hill had a name for it. I can't remember, but there was something when oil would come under the skin, when it would kind of like leak out of the hole and get under the skin. I don't remember. He had like a funny name for it, but things like that happen. You want to like, if you've seen that during your prep, you have to let your coach know so that he can make those choices when it comes to when you're going to pull those. If I have any of those, then we're looking at, 2 weeks to 10 days. Otherwise, if we've had zero issues, I like keeping them in as long as possible. So a couple days out. Okay. If you're looking for the driest athlete you possibly can make, you're pulling them 10 days to 2 weeks out, and you're probably relying on orals into the show. If that's not the strategy, because, that's not always the strategy. If fullness is part of that strategy, then you're leaving them in a little long.
Okay, so I've got three questions that I'm gonna incorporate into a one because they are very correlate together. So for we both know that for the peak week we start to do a little bit manipulating a water. For example, increase it at the beginning just to start to get rid of more water, so the diuretic to increase the diuresis in our body. So, for example, how long before the show you start to leveling the water and sodium intake for your athletes? For example, we right now don't know how much water he drinks and how much salt he intake for some reasons. Never mind. So, for example, you tell them 10, 7 days out, let's eat from this day 10 grams of salt and drink 8 liter of waters. So this is the question number one. And how long before the show you start to manipulate the water and sodium? And if you do it at all, for example, starts to lower the sodium and the water with it, or just water or just sodium, or maybe you increase the potassium or doing anything with potassium at all and magnesium as well. And do you cut the water or sodium completely? And if so, what are the cases and why?
Right. So if I have the choice, I want to leave salt the same. If I have the choice, in general, you pull salt, it leads to a very soft look. There's the strategy when people have they're pulling the salt is I'm doing this to help the water move faster, and then you put the salt back in. The problem with that is if you miss it, the whole prep shot. So, you know, uh, or you're pulling it to make weight. That's a very valid strategy. If I can help it, I'm trying to leave that salt in to the best of my ability. Um, if we're looking at, you said 8 liters around 10 days out, that's a pretty good point. Usually, what happens is I give an athlete an amount of water to drink during prep. Once we're at that 2 week to 10-day point, I ask them, how much water are you drinking? I don't assume because in reality, you just always have to ask because it goes one of two ways. The first way is this person's been slacking, they haven't been drinking the water. The other way is this person is drinking way more water than you think. In those cases, you say, hey, today I need 8 liters, you're assuming, and then they start dropping weight like crazy. Like, what was happening? Well, you find out they were drinking double that. And I have had guys drink double that,
Yeah,
which
me
is
too.
I don't know how you get the water in.
Me neither. I have a
Yeah,
guy who drinks 4 liters of water, 2 bottles of 2 liters of water on one training session.
how I would be peeing so much.
And even a stomach capacity for me,
Yeah,
it's
yeah, impossible.
but
I'd
that
never
was
build it.
easy for him. That was easy for him.
Yeah, I have a guy who, for
Mateusz,
sure.
if you're watching this,
Yeah, that's funny. My guy Chris, CP, more water than any athlete I've ever had ever. Um, and like halfway through prep, I found out he was doing all of his cardio in the sauna. Like what? Yeah, he was riding the bike in the sauna with a big smile on his face, like best attitude of anybody, and just he loved torturing himself.
oh
Just
my God.
yeah, yeah. Some people are wired different, man. But yeah, so if we're looking at that. I think 8 liters is a pretty solid amount, depending on where you were. So the general strategy here is you want to um, increase the diuresis of the water. So you're looking to hyper excrete it. So in general, you raise it from wherever you are to get the water moving, lower aldosterone, and then you get to pull the water down. You want to pull the water down and out pretty close to the show. We're looking at 36 hours ish is where like that needs to come lower. So let's say the show's on Saturday. On Thursday, you're either thinking about making weight or um, or just drying out in general. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're pulling your water Thursday, but let's say you were drinking 8 liters. You might not drink 8 liters on Thursday. Maybe you drink six. Um, there are plenty of cases where this person is ready, on weight, shredded. Water isn't moving from 8 liters. It's going to stay right there at 8 liters on Thursday.
Yeah.
We probably wouldn't change it till, Friday. And then you're kind of, okay, well, heck, in those cases, oftentimes you'd be like, okay, let's go from 8 to 6. You were perfect. So let's just pull it a little bit. And usually in those cases, the reason you're reducing water isn't to get them drier. The reason you're reducing water is so they don't have to pee on stage, because that's something else you're worried about. But that's the plan. No matter with what amounts, you're looking to make sure the water is moving faster and hyper-excreting, and then you're just pulling it close to the show.
Yeah. Okay. And what about
I don't like.
the
I was just
correlation
add
of
in
the salt with that?
okay, sure. One more thing, because I want to make sure I say this. I don't like totally pulling the water. I like having a little bit in there. I think having water, not just freely drinking, but in smart amounts throughout the day, is going to help with digestion and motility of your
Yeah.
food. And also, you're storing what you need to store carbs is salt and water. So if you don't have those things, you're not going to have your best look. Also, just by having the water in there, almost always you look drier. So
Definitely.
yeah. So I did want to say that before we move on. But salt. Um, yeah, if I don't have to touch it, I won't. Um, Usually what happens is I find out what the athlete's having with salt. I might bump it up or I might leave it. And then as we go in, um, the only reason I'm changing it is if the look is just weird. If someone's really watery, then I'll start pulling from it. But um, what I want to do is I also want to make this as not stressful for the athlete as possible. So there's a couple ways to do this. Uh, you can either be like, okay, whatever you are using, pull back 20%. Meaning, if they had like hot sauce, they had this, whatever. If you used 8 cranks of salt, I want you to use 6. Now, that does not sound precise, but it is when you have someone who hasn't measured salt, like measured it at all until a week out, and then they start, well, you might just really get yourself into a world of hurt. It kind of depends. Another way to do it is they sell salt packets, and you'd be like, okay, it's like, here's what we're going to do. We're going to start taking 15 packets, and you're going to use that across the day. As you get closer, hey, we're going to use 12. It's like there are ways to cut it out. It depends on your athlete. If you have someone who's, a James Hollingshead, I'm going to eat every gram of rice, I'm going to do exactly, then being able to give you exact things like, okay, hey, we're going from 10 today, we're going to do 6, then tomorrow we're going to do 8. They're going to execute that no problem. But also, something that I'm always thinking about is, because as a coach, you're thinking about all these details and all the reasons and all this. They don't need to know all that. Doesn't mean you don't explain it, but they just need to know what they need to do, and they need to know how to get it done.
Yeah.
Simply. So that's what I'm trying to deliver, especially during peak week. When they have more bandwidth, that's when we're talking about more things. When it's like they are shredded and they're 5 days out, they don't care. They want to know what to do. And anything super complicated in terms of like I need you to measure this, and I need pictures every 15 minutes, and this, and then we're going to use an IU of log. Okay, it's very overwhelming. Deliver that as simply as you can.
Yeah. What about the diuretic use? Do you like to use them or do you think it's mostly unnecessary? And if you are using it, what kind of diuretics do you like to use?
Good question. Um, I've used multiple diuretics. Um, my favorite's diazide.
Of course.
I think, yeah, my I've used aldactone, but only to help with hyperexcretion. So we're talking about very small amounts.
Yeah.
I've used it to get the process going, not to actually lower the water. So not for 5 days, these anything like that. Um, in general, I don't use diuretics often with athletes.
Yeah.
Um, there was a a pro qualifier that I got. I think I had 6 or 7 athletes in. 3 turned pro that day. Only one athlete used a diuretic.
Yeah.
So it's not. I'm not a diuretics are terrible guy, and I'm not a everybody needs it guy. Some cases you need it for your best look. In some cases you don't. I what I want to do is, I mean, if you're ready, I want to achieve that best look as best as possible just by pulling the water and figuring things out. Because a diuretic is a variable that if you mess it up, that's it. It's over. It's
Yeah.
in, you're done. But some people just look better with them in. They just look harder with them in. So you're kind of like looking at the athlete and determining what you need to do to achieve their best. And almost always, as you would know, going into that last week, you have a pretty good idea whether or not they're going to need one or not. And going into that last like 2 days, you'll know.
Yeah.
But with I would say with most of my athletes, I haven't had to use a diuretic.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's everything is a tool in bodybuilding. So I don't necessarily think that there's something that's bad or something that's good. Like you said, it depends on the situation, depends on the athlete, depends on how much the water is execution during the night and stuff like that. So you have to be very careful with that. And the rule of thumb is always if you wanted to use if you're wondering if you use half on work or a quarter, always go for the quarter. So, uh,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah,
If you're
so
wondering about half a quarter, use the quarter.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Okay, so
There was oh, I want to give a fun example. So here's an example of someone I wasn't sure about, and I'm so glad I didn't. Okay, I have this Canadian figure competitor. Her name is Allie Mills. And before she turned pro, um, we did a show, and I was kind of going back and forth with it. I decided no, we're not doing it. Natural diuresis, no diuretic. She lost 10 pounds of water.
during the night,
Yes, 10 pounds. If I had used a diuretic, the look would have been ruined
yeah,
for sure,
flat as a pancake.
for sure. So, I mean, and if you see her, like that girl is jacked. She's huge. So, but for sure, I think you have to go in and kind of assess in a case by case basis.
Definitely. So, what are your preferred ways to carb up? Do you like to do it let's say for a guy who obviously don't have to make weight because for those who have to, there's a totally different scenario. But for example, heavy weight athletes who do not to open, for example, who do not to make weight, they do you tend to lose them, for example, for 3 to 4 days, but a little bit, or you like to make something like a front load and then just like they say dry them out, or you like to do it like like a night before and use maybe diuretic or something like that. So the protocols
Um,
are countless.
so the problem with the big guys, nothing happens fast. So uh, if you can peak someone, or I mean, if you can carve them up in a day and dry them out, that's a miracle. Or
Yeah.
you're either you're amazing or you got really lucky. It'll take a couple days to fill out a really big guy. I think front loading is usually the smartest strategy. So if you're going in, you're shredding everything. That's usually the way to go. You take, you know, whatever it is, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. You find that really good fullness look. You coast Thursday, Friday. You focus on getting them dry, and then wherever they are Friday night, you can kind of top them off with food. But you can't really fill someone out and dry them out at the same time
Yeah.
to whatever their maximal level of fullness is. So if it's a big guy and you're trying to exploit how big he is, it needs to be done first, probably, and then dry them out. So if you take that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, um, you're going to see on Thursday morning how dry they are. After 3 days of carbs, they're probably not going to be super dry. That's okay. You pull the food down on Thursday, let that water come off. Friday, they're drier. Now you get to focus on how hard do I really want these athletes. Um, you focus on drying them out Friday, and then by Friday night, they should look ready. Then, okay, you want a little more food? That's your opportunity to do it, and then you should wake up ready.
Great. So the last question when it comes to the peak week is going to be about the show day. And what I mean by that is exactly the food on the show days. Because I was spoken with the coaches who are maybe give them the athlete one meal, for example, like a bigger breakfast and then nothing till the show. And there are coaches who are just use the normal diet schedule. For example, you was eating like a cream of rice for your breakfast, and you eat chicken and rice, and maybe they lower, of course, they lower the protein, but what about the your approach? Maybe just some rice cakes or something like that.
So this depends on your time that you're competing.
So
If you are
let's put it into a scenario. For example,
okay, perfect.
my show is at 12
Okay.
o'clock, so at noon. Yeah,
Okay. And bodybuilders go on first.
yeah. And bodybuilding is going first, and I'm on stage at 12.
Okay, perfect,
Yeah,
perfect. Okay, well, assuming we nailed the carb up and everything, what I would like to do in that case, if you don't have to do anything special, you're not in a rush. I want that athlete to get a good night's sleep. That's very hard in prep,
yeah,
especially toward the end. But I'm not going to make them wake up at 4 or 5 a.m. You don't have to. I want you to sleep in as long as possible. And I'm just ready when you're ready. They're almost never going to sleep past 7, because you don't sleep well. But let's say you wake up at 7 o'clock, send pictures. Usually we're going to have around the same normal breakfast. If you're normally having oats, we're not having oats because it's show day. We're
yeah.
probably having cream of rice, something that's easy to digest. We're having a rice cake, something like that. Um, we may reduce the protein in meal one, but usually for satiety's sake, you're already full. We don't need a ton of food here. So in general, it's probably around the same. If we're competing at noon, probably getting one more in. I'm not going to try to pack this person with 3 meals before the show.
Yeah.
That amount of time, we could probably get another meal in. That other meal is going to be small due to the time. I don't want any distension through the abdomen. I don't want heavy breathing, and I want you to look dry. So, yeah, I probably cut um, protein by 30-40%, and then it would just be carbs probably. Whatever's easiest to digest, whether that's cream of rice, rice cakes, rice. The only reason I don't like cream of rice during these times is if someone adds a bunch of stuff to theirs normally, sweeteners, etc. When we're that close to like we only have a couple hours, I don't want any like super artificial things going in if it's a bunch of additives. I would rather you not have that so that we don't have any opportunity for your gut to be upset with you.
Okay, but could you tell the amounts, for example, and because you said cream of rice, but cream of rice is just a carb. You do not use any fats to just like, slow the digestion a little bit, keep the blood sugar a little bit stable, or maybe what sort of protein would you choose? Do you allow your athletes to use whey isolate, for example, or do you cut the whey isolate a long before? And stuff like that because those are the questions that often
Yeah.
are in the athlete's mind because they
Okay.
are sometimes afraid. For example, I've eating the bagel for my breakfast and my last meal for the last 8 months, something like
Mhm.
that. And my coach says change exactly nothing. Use exactly the same sauces. For example, I use my garlic sauce, my
Yeah.
ketchup, and stuff like that. Still, because I weighed it in, so I
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
exactly how much I eat, and everything stays exactly the same.
Yeah.
So I've used ISO and everything.
So isolate, I tend to not like that going into um, the the contest day. Athletes are using it in peak week. For me, it's not so much. Um, I don't assume it's going to hold water or anything like that. With something like isolate, there's just digestive issues that we can run into, and I want to eliminate anything that's going to mess them up. In terms of sauces, almost always people are using the sauces all throughout prep. And I don't cut sauces. Like let's say it was like a reduced sugar ketchup or whatever the case is. That's always the same. And when the protein goes down, so does the sauce amounts, just because you're you're not going to have as much sauce on less protein. Probably there's probably just making it up with salt or whatever. But in terms of amounts and um, adding fats, it depends on what they were eating before. So, sure, oftentimes there is some fat and carbs in those meals. I wouldn't necessarily think, okay, we have to add fat because you know, we have this amount of time and whatever. But there's nothing wrong with the fat. I wouldn't not have the fat. But sure, if I had cream of rice right before, I probably would add a little fat. Um, there's a couple of things I think about practicality wise. A lot of times when it's that meal right before, they don't have a microwave. So cream of rice, you can't make it. Listen, with a lot of these people, it's like they're stuck backstage for hours at a time. You just don't have it.
Yeah, but it's something called preparation.
I know. Listen, can you go talk
You're
to my
you
people?
are you are an athlete. You're
Okay,
supposed
so
to
here's
have I don't know if you
here's the deal. Most of my girls, that'd be covered. They already made it. They brought it. It's done. With a lot of the guys, what you see over here is they're like lost. Now, it's not everybody. I have some people who every single thing they could possibly have for their show day is already made by their bed before they wake up. It's just not everybody. So you're kind of dealing with individuals here. I try to make it as simple as possible. So if it were right before, I think here's the question on whether it be cream of rice or rice. For me, the amount. How many carbs do you need before? If you need 400 grams of rice, I'm not having you eat 400 grams of rice. I'd rather you eat um, a bagel and then the next amount in cream of rice, something that will be like easy on your stomach. if you're going to have to eat 400 grams of rice, it's going to be a ton of rice. Or let's say it was a cup of rice, a bagel, and nut butter, kind of make up the calories.
Yeah, I see some logical holes in this
Sure.
approach, and especially is in your like a American style coaching fashion. Because, for example, you says to me, you're not believing that way it's gonna holding water or something like that, but it can cause an indigestion. But for example, if I using the same way throughout the whole prep and I know that it's perfectly digestible for me, but
Mm-hmm.
I use chicken and I buy it in the different stores because, for example, yesterday I was in Poland and tomorrow I'm gonna compete in, I don't know, France, for example, and I buy the chicken in France. That chicken have like a 5 million% more probability to cause than indigestion than that's way, which I using from the same manufacturer, the same box throughout the whole prep. And the same thing you says about, for example, bagels. If someone is not using a bagels every day, but right now he has to eat a lot of carbs, you will allow him to eat a bagel. For example, I have a coach before,
Mm-hmm.
and he not allowed me to use the whey in the last week of the prep because of dairy, and no,
Mm-hmm.
nothing with the dairy could be allowed. But then he told me to order couple of burgers. uh, there was a 2 days show, so I eat like a two burgers the day before the first show, and then one or two burgers the next day, and that was with all my shows with him. So that was a shit ton of cheese in this.
Sure.
So where is the logical sense in that?
Sure. Well, if I'm having someone with bagels, they've had bagels in the plan. We're not introducing
Okay,
new things.
so
So with that,
get
that
rid
was
of
just
the
a
bagels, but
yeah.
what about
So,
the
but
whey?
in terms of the isolate, um, I hear what you're saying. You're not wrong. Especially if you're talking about traveling with different countries, because my assumption is you cooked your food at home and you brought it. So it's like you wouldn't even have the variable of countries, right?
Yeah.
So I could see it the other way too. But you're not wrong. It's of the same batch, it's the same isolate you've been using, whatever. Um, I guess what I generally recognize is a lot of people don't do super well with isolate. In the
Yeah,
case where
but if
I
you
know,
are not, you should not supposed to use it throughout the whole prep then.
I 100% agree.
Yeah.
Um, I'm just no, I don't disagree with you. I think what you're saying is logical. So I
Okay.
really don't even have a rebuttal to it. You're right. The only reason I would pull it isn't because of
Just of your guts telling you that. Uh,
I guess so.
yeah.
Uh, and
And
usually,
that's I think
I
that's
guess
totally
here's
fine because I have a
I
lot
think
of stuff like that. Though I don't know why,
well,
but if someone asked me, for example, what would be the better choice, to eat a chicken or to eat an isolate? To be honest, I don't believe that chicken is better, but I do.
yeah, I think the other so I'm trying to think of like all the facets to this, right? The other part is almost always they're starving, and that sits a little like in terms of satiety more than a drink or something you'd mix in. But it's not necessarily better. If there are literally no issues, then of course you can use it. But like an hour before you go on, we know how chicken digests. If that's perfect,
Yeah,
that's
but
usually my gut.
you
I go
you,
with that.
you use the word satiety a couple of times, but we are talking about the day of the show. I don't want to my athletes to be
I don't want I don't want them to be stuffed. I don't want them to be going crazy.
okay, okay, okay. So, man, let's says I won my show. we've got it. We've got it. So I just walk out from the stage. Obviously, you allowed me to eat something and stuff like that. For how long I could do whatever I wanted to, and if I'm let clear that up. I've walked off the stage. What, in your opinion, I should do? Am I allowed to eat something? Am I allowed to drink? Am I allowed to take my wife on a dinner? Am I allowed to stuff my ass for the 5 days straight?
Yeah.
What should I do for the next couple of days?
As far as getting fluid in, immediately start doing it immediately. And usually, what I do is, depending on the amount of water we had, especially if we used a diuretic or we had to pull it kind of hard, I want to give them a certain amount as like a minimum. I'm like, hey, listen, um, in the next 30 minutes, I want you to get a liter down. Do it slowly, but I want a liter down. After that, you can drink more and start to eat. Well, let's reintroduce some water. That night, if we're assuming they don't have shows next week or the week after, well, season's
We
done.
finished this
Season's
season, right?
done. Season's done. Yeah. Enjoy the night. Have fun. I don't care.
One night,
Um,
or you have like a 2 days rule or 3 days rule, or
I don't have a rule. It usually depends on the person, but usually what I'd say is like if a show's on a Saturday, send me pictures on Monday.
okay.
Do whatever you want. I mean, it's like go out for Saturday night. Um, because we're assuming like if someone's not gonna if you trust someone and they're not gonna blow it out and binge, then usually what will happen is they'll eat Saturday night. Um, they'll want something for Sunday morning. Most people have one or two clean meals on Sunday because like food's already packed. You're driving, you're flying, you're doing something, and then you're getting something for Sunday night. Um, and then we're done. Cool. You couldn't have wrecked yourself in 2 days. We're back on some form of diet on Monday. And then Saturday, that same week, you're already having another free meal.
Okay. So, what about the next period after the show? Let's assume that we have a pretty like a decent time on the contest, like a schedule. So, for example, I do 3 shows in about 1 month, for example. So my health isn't as racked as guys who are, for example, competing for the 12 months or something
Yeah,
like that. But it's not perfect, obviously, because I am after
sure.
the contest prep season. So that's a normal. Would you like to put me on some sort of health phase or straight into a rebound?
If health isn't the main concern, and health's always the main concern, let me rephrase that. If health isn't bad, I'm just like, okay, things are a little off because of this. Yeah, let's go for the rebound. If health is a concern at all, you cannot go for the rebound. Just like that's just something that isn't the opportunity. But if it is, then yeah, I'd like to push for that rebound. And afterward, we have the health phase. If not, then you can stay lean, have the health phase, then still rebound. You can still catch that rebound after. You just have to be more patient.
Okay. Okay, so do you like to, let's say that I'm finished my rebound. So you like me to come off completely, or how that health phase should look like, in your opinion?
This is a serious competitor, then you're not coming off of testosterone.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not. You're a serious competitor who either is pro or you're trying to turn pro. Then you've already committed to this. You're not coming off of testosterone, and you know what? You're not going to feel good doing it. There's no point, in my opinion, in coming off for 8 to 12 weeks just to feel crappy. Your endocrine
Yeah.
system, let's be frank, is probably shot because you've been a bodybuilder for X amount of years. We're not going to magically turn anything on and then you're just going to feel really crappy um, and and hypogonadal for
Yeah.
12 weeks. So, in my opinion, TRT is a great option. Go down to the TRT level or even just a little above that. You feel good. Blood markers will go back in range, and you use supplementation to fix whatever you need to. Growth hormone can still be used as long as it's not creating any blood pressure issues. And honestly, with a little test and growth hormone, you can still make some progress. You have food. So uh, that can still be done. And then once everything's cleared, you can put the PEDs back in.
Okay. So I think I've managed to get all the information from your brain out for those people who are very interested in your approach to the off season as the contest prep as well. So thank you so much, Nelson, for keeping with me for almost 2 hours, something like that, or 1.5 hour, because it's Sunday and you probably should rather just stay with your family or take your girls out for that meal we was talking about before. So I hope that you have a great time as well. I'm definitely had. So for those who are sticking with us to the end of this podcast, all the information when it comes to the coaching and all the social media to the Nelson, you can find in the description down below. And thank you for being with us. Please share, subscribe because the algorithm of the YouTube is not great because I am uploading it from the Poland and this is in English, so YouTube just thinks that it's not really necessary to push it further. So if you can share it with your friends or the guys who are really would benefit to get all the details that Nelson was kind to share with us, I will be really appreciative of that. So thank you one more time, Nelson, and bye, everyone.
Thank you for having me.